More wine for the Archbishop, boy, quickly. Master Harold's voice cut through the chaos of Kensington Palace's kitchens like a blade through silk. The head chef didn't even glance at the new servant, too consumed by the controlled pandemonium that surrounded him like a living organism. Prince William of Kent, disguised beneath humble clothes and flour-dusted hands that felt foreign against his royal skin, nodded silently while carrying the crystal decanter. The weight of it trembled in his grasp, not from its heaviness, but from the weight of what he was about to discover. What he didn't know yet was that the next few hours would shatter everything he believed about the woman he planned to marry. Have you ever felt that cold certainty creeping up your spine, whispering that the person you love might be wearing a mask? The underground world of Kensington Palace was a universe William had never truly witnessed, despite growing up within these very walls. Stone walls glistened with layers of steam and sweat accumulated over centuries of service. The air was thick, almost suffocating, pressing against his lungs with the aroma of roasting venison mingling with fresh bread still crackling from the ovens, and simmering wines spiced with cinnamon bark and cloves that made his eyes water. Flames danced beneath enormous copper pots, blackened by years of use, while scullery maids rushed back and forth like soldiers in battle, their faces red and gleaming from exertion, carrying baskets overflowing with root vegetables caked in dirt, and trays piled high with gleaming silver that reflected distorted versions of their exhausted faces. The ceiling hung low and oppressive, supported by wooden beams that creaked with age, the heat pressed against every surface, making the air shimmer like liquid. And the noise, God, the noise was a symphony of survival that assaulted his senses, clattering dishes creating percussion, shouted orders overlapping in urgent harmonies, the rhythmic chopping of knives against ancient wooden boards worn smooth by generations of cooks, the hiss of meat hitting hot iron, the bubble and pop of sauces reducing to perfection. 5 days. That's how long William had been living this double life, this strange existence split between two worlds that occupied the same building but might as well have been on different planets. 5 days since he abandoned his velvet chambers with their silk curtains and morning sunlight, his robes embroidered with golden thread that caught candlelight, and his crown that suddenly felt like a cage rather than a symbol of power. 5 days since he slipped into the shadows of his own palace, like a ghost haunting familiar halls, invisible to those who would normally bow at his approach. The whispers had started slowly, delicate rumors drifting through the court like poisoned smoke carried on an autumn breeze. Lady Victoria Ashford, his fiancée, the woman he would marry in a fortnight before all of European nobility in a ceremony that would unite two great houses, was not what she seemed. The words came from servants mainly, dismissed by courtiers as jealous gossip from those envious of Victoria's beauty and position. But how could he have known that the truth, hiding in these kitchens, would be darker than any nightmare he'd imagined? What secrets lurk in the places we never think to look? William had dismissed the whispers at first, the way powerful men often do when uncomfortable truths threaten their comfortable plans. Victoria was elegant, poised, breathtakingly beautiful with golden hair that seemed spun from sunlight itself. Her bloodline was impeccable, stretching back generations to kings and queens whose portraits lined the gallery halls. Her manners were refined to absolute perfection, every gesture calculated with mathematical precision, every word measured and weighed before leaving her lips. She was, by all accounts, presented to the world the perfect match for a future king. But why did his instincts scream danger every time she smiled? The whispers persisted, growing louder, more urgent, more desperate, until he could no longer ignore them. Something dark lingered beneath her porcelain smile, something that made his instincts scream danger, even as his heart wanted desperately to believe in her innocence, in the fairy tale they were supposed to be living. So he did the unthinkable, the act that would have scandalized the entire court if they knew. He disguised himself as a common servant and infiltrated the kitchens, the beating heart of the palace where truth flowed as freely as wine from casks. Servants spoke without filters here, without the suffocating fear of royal reprisal that kept tongues still in the upper halls, because who would believe a kitchen maid's testimony over a lady of the court adorned in jewels and titles? William now chopped onions beside Martha Sullivan, a weathered woman of 60 years, whose hands bore the scars and calluses of 4 decades serving royalty through 3 different monarchs. Deep lines etched her face like a map of suffering and survival, each wrinkle telling a story of long nights and early mornings. Her eyes, though, remained sharp as broken glass, missing nothing, seeing everything. She moved with the brutal efficiency of someone who had performed the same tasks 1,000 times, stirring pots with automatic precision born of muscle memory, tasting sauces with a discerning tongue that could detect a pinch of salt out of place, barking orders at younger staff who scattered like frightened birds at her commands, knowing her standards were impossibly high. The engagement banquet was tonight. The kitchens boiled with tension so thick you could taste it on your tongue, metallic and bitter. Master Harold, a broad man with a moustache that curled at the ends like a villain from a storybook, shouted commands like a general leading troops into the final battle. Trays were polished until they gleamed like mirrors, showing distorted reflections. Dishes were arranged with military precision, each placement measured to the millimeter. Every detail had to be perfect for the prince and his bride-to-be, because imperfection in royal service meant disgrace, dismissal, ruin. Little did they know that perfection was about to crack wide open, revealing the rot beneath. What happens when the facade finally crumbles? William kept his head down, focusing on the potatoes he was peeling with blistered, aching hands that had never known real labor until this week. His back screamed from hours bent over cutting boards at an unnatural angle. His feet throbbed in shoes too small, borrowed from a servant his size, but he endured, driven by a need stronger than physical pain, stronger than pride, stronger than fear. He had to know the truth, even if it destroyed him, even if it meant calling off the wedding and facing the political catastrophe that would follow. Is it true the prince is marrying that Ashford woman? The question came from a young scullery maid, barely 16, with red hands from scrubbing and eyes that still held innocence, while stirring a pot of soup that bubbled like a witch's cauldron. Her voice carried genuine curiosity, almost innocent in its directness, unaware of the bomb she was about to detonate. Martha Sullivan released a bitter laugh that cut through the kitchen noise like a blade through silk. The sound was sharp, knowing, filled with years of witnessing things no one wanted to acknowledge. She lowered her voice to a venomous whisper, glancing around with practiced paranoia to ensure no one important was listening, checking the shadows for eavesdroppers. That poor lad doesn't know who he's getting involved with. The way she said who made it sound like a curse, like she was speaking of a demon rather than a lady. William's hands stilled on the potato. Every muscle in his body tensed like a bowstring pulled taut. His breath caught in his throat, trapped there like a bird in a cage, his lungs refusing to expand. This was the moment he'd been waiting for, though part of him wished desperately he could unhear what was coming next. Have you ever stood on the edge of a truth that would change everything? That moment when you know there's no going back. Martha leaned closer to the young maid, her voice dropping even lower, forcing everyone nearby to strain to hear, creating an intimacy of shared secrets. I served at Ashford Manor before coming to the palace, back when I was young and foolish enough to think service to nobility meant something honorable. That woman... Martha paused, her eyes narrowing with a memory so vivid it seemed to physically pain her, like touching a fresh burn. Victoria Ashford poisoned her first husband, the Earl of Sussex. I witnessed it with my own eyes, night after night, and I've carried that knowledge like a stone in my chest ever since." The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples that would soon become waves capable of drowning kingdoms, of destroying dynasties, of rewriting history. William's knife clattered to the stone floor. The sound was sharp, unmistakable, cutting through the ambient noise like a gunshot in a cathedral. Several servants turned to look, curiosity and annoyance mixing on their tired faces, wondering what the clumsy new boy had done now. William bent quickly to retrieve it, his mind reeling, his thoughts fragmenting into 1,000 sharp pieces that cut him from the inside. His blood ran cold, not from fear of what she might do, but from contained rage that burned like ice in his veins, freezing and burning simultaneously. Join us as we witness how one woman's courage to speak truth will save a kingdom. Tell us in the comments, would you have the strength to speak up if you witness something terrible? Martha continued, oblivious to the storm she had unleashed in the young man beside her, the future king, trembling with revelation. Every evening, like clockwork you could set your watch by, she mixed arsenic into his tea. White powder, tasteless, odorless, stirred into Earl Grey until it dissolved completely. The Earl was a good man, kind even, generous to his staff in ways nobility rarely is. He remembered our names, asked about our families, but he stood in her way, you see. His existence prevented her from accessing his fortune, from claiming his titles, from moving up the ladder of power she'd been climbing her entire life. When he died, screaming in agony, convulsing so violently it took 3 men to hold him down, she inherited the entire fortune and burned the evidence in the manor's great fireplace. I watched her feed those letters to the flames, one by one, with a smile on her face like someone enjoying a pleasant afternoon tea. Martha's voice cracked with old anger, with guilt at her own silence. Now she's coming for the crown. The prince will be next. Mark my words, he won't survive a year of marriage. They'll call it illness, tragic and sudden, and she'll weep beautifully at the funeral before claiming regency. The young maid gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. That's horrible. Why hasn't anyone said anything? Why hasn't anyone stopped her? Why hasn't she been arrested? Martha's expression darkened like storm clouds gathering on the horizon, heavy with rain that's been held back too long. And the worst part is, no one will believe a simple cook if she speaks up. She has power, wealth beyond imagination, connections that reach into every corner of this kingdom like spiderwebs, while I only have my word, the testimony of a woman who scrubs pots and stirs sauces. Who would take the testimony of an old kitchen woman over a lady of the nobility dripping in jewels and titles? We're invisible to people like her. We always have been. Don't you see? That's why she gets away with it. The silence in William's mind was deafening, a roar of white noise that drowned out everything else. Every smile from Victoria, every calculated caress in moonlit gardens, when she'd seemed so tender, every sweet word whispered against his ear that had made his heart race, all had been a performance to reach the throne. She had played him like a master musician plays an instrument, and he had been too blind, too trusting, too desperate to believe in love, to see the strings attached to his limbs, manipulating his every move. Have you ever realized that someone you loved was wearing a mask the whole time? That sickening moment when you see their true face. His hands trembled as he gripped the counter's edge until his knuckles turned white, until the pain in his fingers grounded him in reality. Rage burned in his chest like wildfire, consuming a drought-stricken forest, hot and destructive and purifying. But beneath the rage was something deeper, something that steadied him like bedrock beneath shifting sand. Clarity. He had been right to doubt. His instincts had not betrayed him. The whispers were not jealous gossip, but desperate warnings from those who had seen the truth and had no power to act on it. Master Harold's voice cut through his thoughts like an axe through wood, brutal and sudden. Boy, stop daydreaming like you're at a country fair and take those platters to the main hall. The guests are arriving and we're already behind schedule. Move! William nodded mechanically, lifting a silver tray laden with crystal glasses that caught the firelight and threw dancing shadows across the walls like spirits. His movements were automatic, his body operating on instinct, while his mind worked furiously, planning, calculating, preparing. He had the truth now, clutched in his hands like a weapon he wasn't sure how to wield, sharp and dangerous. The question that burned through him was simple, but terrifying. What would he do with it? And more importantly, would anyone believe him when the time came to expose her? Would they choose to believe their prince, or would they dismiss his claims as cold feet before a wedding? If this story has already moved you, tell us in the comments what city you're watching from. And leave your like so we can continue bringing you stories that touch the heart and remind us that truth can come from the most unexpected places. Your engagement helps us keep creating content that inspires. That evening, during the engagement banquet, the great hall of Kensington Palace glowed with opulence that bordered on obscene, a display of wealth so excessive it felt almost violent. Chandeliers dripped with thousands of crystals that caught the candlelight and scattered it across the room like captured stars fallen to earth, creating constellations on the ceiling. Long tables stretched the length of the hall like the spines of great beasts, draped in white silk, so fine it seemed to glow from within, adorned with golden candelabras taller than a man, and bouquets of white roses that filled the air with their heavy, almost sickly sweet perfume that made breathing feel thick. Lords and ladies of the highest ranks filled the hall like peacocks in a gilded cage, preening and displaying. They wore their finest silks and velvets in deep burgundies and royal blues, emerald greens and midnight blacks, their jewels glittering in the candlelight as they laughed and chatted with the easy confidence of those who have never known real fear, real hunger, real consequence. The atmosphere was one of celebration, of power consolidating, of alliances being forged in wine and whispered promises that would shape the political landscape for decades. At the head table sat Prince William, dressed in royal blue with gold embroidery that caught every flicker of candlelight, making him look like he was wearing the sky itself. Beside him sat Lady Victoria Ashford, and she was a vision calculated to perfection. White lace and pearls adorned her like armor, her golden hair arranged in elaborate curls that must have taken her maids hours to create, her smile practiced in mirrors until it seemed natural, effortless. She toasted elegantly, her voice like honey laced with poison, as she thanked the assembled nobility for their presence on this joyous occasion. Her words perfectly chosen, perfectly delivered. William watched her with new eyes, eyes that had been opened in the steam and chaos of kitchens below, in the place where truth lived. He saw the calculation behind her smile now, the cold ambition gleaming in her eyes like ice in moonlight, sharp and unforgiving. She was a predator dressed in silk and perfumed with roses, and he had almost become her prey. What would you do if you discovered the person you were about to marry was a killer? Behind him, in the shadows near the servants' entrance, where the light didn't quite reach, stood the young kitchen boy, who was really a prince, playing the most dangerous game of his life. No one looked at him twice. Servants were invisible in spaces like these, ghosts that moved platters and poured wine, but were never truly seen, never truly acknowledged as human beings with thoughts and feelings and knowledge that could change everything. Victoria raised her glass, the crystal catching light like a prism, her voice carrying across the hall with practiced projection. To our future together, to the union of our houses, and to the prosperity of this great kingdom that we shall guide with wisdom and grace for generations to come. The crowd cheered. Glasses clinked in a symphony of crystal. The sound of celebration filled the air like the ringing of bells at a wedding. But underneath the joy, something deadly was waiting to be revealed. Can you feel the tension building? Stay with us. William, the real William, sitting at the head table with his heart pounding and his hands clenched beneath the tablecloth, rose from his throne. The movement was sudden enough that conversations died mid-sentence, laughter choked off, glasses paused halfway to lips. Every eye in the hall turned to him, expectation and curiosity mixing in equal measure, wondering what announcement he would make, what romantic declaration would come next. "Before we continue this celebration," William said, his voice clear and commanding, carrying the weight of royal authority that he'd been trained to project since childhood, since before he could remember, "I must confess something to everyone present. A truth that cannot wait, a revelation that changes everything." A murmur rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat fields, bending and swaying. Victoria's smile flickered for just a moment, a crack in her perfect facade that only those watching closely would notice. Her fingers tightened imperceptibly on her wineglass, her knuckles whitening, tendons standing out like cords. With a gesture that brooked no argument, that commanded absolute obedience, William summoned Martha Sullivan to the main hall. The elderly cook entered, trembling, confusion and fear written across her weathered face in lines deeper than age. She didn't understand why she had been called, didn't know if she was about to be punished for speaking out of turn or praised for some service she couldn't remember. Her simple dress and work-roughened hands stood in stark contrast to the opulence surrounding her, making her look even smaller and more vulnerable, like a sparrow in a hall built for eagles. "This woman," William announced, and the hall fell into absolute silence, so complete that the crackle of candles could be heard, the shift of fabric, the intake of breath. "Just saved my life without knowing it. This humble cook who serves your meals and asks for nothing in return holds in her memory a truth that would have seen me dead within a year." Have you ever witnessed the moment when truth collides with power, when the invisible become unforgettable, when someone who has been ignored their entire life suddenly becomes the most important person in the room? Watch what happens next. "Martha," William continued, his eyes never leaving Victoria's face, watching her mask begin to crack like porcelain under pressure. "Repeat what you said this afternoon in the kitchen. Tell them what you witnessed at Ashford Manor. Tell them everything, and know that you have my protection and the protection of this throne. No harm will come to you for speaking honestly." Martha's eyes widened until the whites showed all around, like a frightened horse. She looked at the prince, then at Victoria, whose face had gone pale as death itself, the color draining away like water from a broken vessel to leave her looking like a beautiful corpse propped in a chair. The lady's hands gripped her wineglass so tightly her knuckles turned white, the tendons standing out like cords ready to snap. "Your Highness, Martha's voice was uncertain, wavering like a candle flame in the wind, threatening to go out. "Speak," William commanded, but his tone was gentle, encouraging, giving her the strength she needed. "Tell them the truth. You have my protection, and the protection of everyone in this hall who values justice over convenience." Martha drew a shaky breath that rattled in her chest. The weight of every noble gaze pressed upon her like a physical force, hundreds of eyes boring into her worn face, judging, measuring, doubting. But she had lived long enough to know that truth once spoken cannot be unspoken. And sometimes the burden of silence weighs more than the risk of revelation. Sometimes speaking is the only way to save your soul. "Lady Victoria Ashford poisoned her first husband," Martha said, her voice gaining strength with each word, growing from a whisper to a declaration that filled the hall. "The Earl of Sussex. I was a kitchen maid at the manor then, young and terrified, invisible like all servants are in great houses. Every evening at precisely 8 o'clock she mixed arsenic into his tea. White powder stirred into Earl Grey until it dissolved completely. I watched him grow weaker day by day, watched the life drain from him like water from a cracked vessel, watched him waste away while physicians scratched their heads and prescribed useless remedies. They called it a mysterious wasting disease, a curse from God, bad humors. It was none of those things. Martha's voice hardened like steel being forged. When he died, screaming and convulsing in agony so terrible the servants fled the room in terror, she inherited everything. Every pound, every property, every title, every connection. And I saw her burn the letters afterward, the documents, the evidence that might have proven what she'd done. Watched her feed them to the fire with her own pale hands, one by one, while humming a little tune like she was arranging flowers. The hall erupted, gasps of shock, shouts of disbelief, the sound of chairs scraping as nobles rose to their feet, hands flying to mouths, to hearts, to the arms of companions for support. It was chaos wrapped in expensive fabric, pandemonium in a palace. Victoria stood abruptly, her chair clattering backward and hitting the floor with a crash that echoed. Her face was a mask of fury and panic, fighting for dominance, beauty twisted into something ugly and raw. "This is absurd," she cried, her voice shrill, losing all its practiced sweetness, revealing the venom beneath. "The ramblings of a senile old woman. You cannot possibly believe this madness. She's jealous, deranged, seeking attention and gold at my expense." "The guards have already searched your chambers," William interrupted coldly, each word falling like a hammer blow on an anvil. "They found the poison hidden in your jewelry box, tucked beneath your pearl necklace where you thought no one would look. They found the letters confirming your plot to eliminate me after the wedding, correspondence with your accomplices, detailing exactly how my tragic accident would occur during a hunting trip next month." His voice dropped to something dangerous, something royal and absolute. "Did you really think you could poison me as you poisoned the Earl? Did you think I would go as quietly as he did, without question, without investigation?" Victoria's mask shattered completely, fragments of her carefully constructed persona falling away like pieces of broken mirror to reveal the monster beneath. Her beautiful face contorted with rage that was almost inhuman, transforming her into something nightmare-worthy. "You fool!" she shrieked, spittle flying from her lips. "You were supposed to die quietly, just like him, slip away in your sleep with everyone believing you'd taken ill. The physicians would have called it heart failure, tragic in one so young. The throne was within my grasp. I was so close to everything I've worked for my entire life." The confession hung in the air like a blade, suspended over all their heads. Join us as we witness justice unfold in the most unexpected way. Have you ever seen someone's mask slip completely? That moment when they reveal who they truly are. The nobility stood frozen, horrified by the venom pouring from her lips like poison from a snake's fangs, by the naked ambition and cruelty that had been hiding behind her lovely face. Some of the ladies were weeping openly, their carefully applied cosmetics running. Some of the men had hands on their swords, as if expecting Victoria to transform into something even more dangerous, a monster from legend. Guards moved swiftly, their boots thundering on marble like drumbeats announcing execution, flanking Victoria on both sides with hands on their weapons. She struggled briefly, thrashing like a cornered animal, clawing at their arms with manicured nails that drew blood. But there was nowhere to run, no escape route she hadn't already blocked by her own venomous words, her own confession. As they led her away, she screamed accusations and threats that echoed through the great hall, like the cries of the damned, bouncing off the high ceilings. "You'll regret this! My family will destroy you! You cannot do this to me! I am Lady Victoria Ashford! I am nobility! I am—" Her voice faded only when the heavy oak doors closed behind her, with a boom that sounded like the closing of a tomb, like the final note of a requiem, sealing her fate. Silence descended once more, thick and heavy as a burial shroud. The assembled nobility looked at each other with wild eyes, trying to process what they had just witnessed, the revelation that would be talked about for generations. A lady they had welcomed into their midst, a woman they had danced with and dined with and complimented, revealed as a murderer and a conspirator. How many of them wondered in that moment what other monsters hid behind beautiful faces in their own ranks? What secrets lurked in their own great houses? William turned to Martha Sullivan, who stood trembling in the center of the hall, overwhelmed by what had just transpired, by the enormity of what her words had set in motion. He descended from his throne, his royal robes trailing behind him like a cape of justice, and approached her slowly. The crowd watched in breathless silence as he took her weathered, work-roughened hand in his own soft, royal one, the contrast stark and meaningful. "You saved my life," he said softly, loud enough for all to hear, but gentle as a benediction, as a prayer of gratitude. Not with a sword, not with an army of men, but with the truth spoken from an honest heart, when silence would have been safer. There is no greater service to a kingdom than that. You had nothing to gain and everything to lose, yet you spoke anyway. That is true courage, the kind that changes history. Tears spilled down Martha's cheeks, cutting channels through the flour dust still clinging to her face like war paint. Her whole body shook with the release of years of carrying that terrible secret, of wondering if she should speak, if anyone would listen, if it would matter, if a woman like her could make any difference at all in the games of nobles. "From this day forward," William announced to the assembly, his voice ringing with royal authority that echoed off stone walls, "Martha Sullivan shall be appointed royal household advisor. Her wisdom, her integrity, and her courage have proven that true nobility is not found in bloodlines painted on family crests, but in character forged through lived experience. She will have apartments in the palace befitting her new station, a generous pension for her remaining years, and a voice at my table when decisions of state are made. Her counsel will be valued above many who claim noble blood but possess no noble heart." The hall erupted in applause. It was not the polite, measured applause of courtly etiquette, mechanical clapping from people who've been told to show appreciation. This was something genuine, moved by the extraordinary events they had witnessed, by the righting of a terrible wrong, by justice served in the most unexpected way imaginable. If you've been moved by this moment of truth and justice, let us know in the comments which part touched your heart most deeply. Subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss our stories that celebrate the strength of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Leave your like if you believe in the invisible strength of dignity, in the power of truth over deception. Together, we're building a community that values integrity over status, character over title. The engagement banquet that was meant to celebrate a union instead became the night that exposed one of the darkest plots against the crown in recent memory. And it all came to light because a prince humbled himself enough to listen to voices others ignored, and an old cook found the courage to speak truth to power when silence would have been so much easier, so much safer. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story that reminds us where true nobility lives. Let us know in the comments which part moved you the most, whether you've ever had to speak a difficult truth, whether you believe in the power of ordinary courage. Subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss our upcoming stories. Leave your like if you believe that truth is more powerful than deception, that courage can come from unexpected places, and that dignity lives in every heart, brave enough to speak honestly. And before you go, check out the story I'm leaving here on the side. I'm sure it will also move you and make you reflect on the heroes hiding in plain sight all around us, waiting for their moment to change everything. What began as a whispered warning in a palace kitchen became the truth that changed a nation. And on that night in Kensington Palace, everyone learned that the most valuable crown is not the one worn on your head, but the one built from integrity, courage, and the willingness to listen to voices that society tells you don't matter. That truth changed everything, forever.